Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to your first e-lesson, distance learning lesson in social studies, and I'm going to be talking to you today about European exploration of the New World. We've been studying our indigenous cultures, and particularly the Anishinaabe or Ojibwa, and we're going to get to a point to see how the cultures um, got along and how that shaped Wisconsin today when the Europeans finally made their way to Wisconsin. So, in order to talk about that, we have to talk about Christopher Columbus. Outside of Leif Erikson, he was the first European explorer to make the way to the New World. And so, what was Columbus doing in 1492? Well, he was on the lookout for sugar and spice and all things nice. Actually, it was spice and silk. Columbus wanted to find a shorter route to China and India. China to get in on the silk market, and India for its flavorful spices. And rather than going through Europe and into Asia through land and by sea, which was an awful long, arduous, and dangerous trail, or going down along Africa and coming back up, he thought there'd be a shorter route going directly across the ocean. And he didn't know that he'd be landing into a newly discovered world for Europe. When he landed here, not so much in North America per se, but on the islands just south of Florida, he did meet people who he thought were Indian, as in the country India, but quickly realized no, they were a whole different people, which he named Indians, which we of course call our indigenous peoples or Native Americans. And as you can see from the map here, Columbus made several crossings of the ocean into the New World, and of course he shared what he learned, which got Europe off full excited, and so they started to explore as well. And I kind of think of this, they were in competition with each other, different countries. I kind of think of it like the Packers and Vikings and the Bears and the Lions all competing to be top dog. And they were competing to build what we call an empire, which was the more land you had, the more resources you had, the stronger your empire was. And some of the players we're going to talk about are the Spanish and Portuguese, the British, and the French. This picture here kind of talks about after time and exploration where these different European countries settled. You got the Russians up here along Alaska. You have the Spanish here in what we now call Mexico. Do you think it's a coincidence that people from Mexico speak Spanish? There you go. And of course, you have the English or British along here, the Appalachians along the East Coast, and way up here by Hudson Bay. And the French, who we're going to really key in on because guess where they discovered and focused? Our good home, Wisconsin. So, again, here are the players Spain and Portugal, Great Britain, and France are the ones I'm going to key in on. Spain and Portugal were neighbors and in direct competition, and here you can see France. And they both kind of focused their way into the Caribbean and down into South America and made their way up. And they ended up having a big interest in gold. And how they went about getting it wasn't exactly the nicest, but that's a story for another day. The British were interested in establishing colonies, and they established themselves along the eastern coast of what is now the United States. And one of the reasons they didn't have a larger land impact is because they had the Appalachian Mountains to get across, and that kind of slowed them down and stopped them. So the English were building colonies, which ended up becoming states later down the road. Our friends in France made their way along the St. Lawrence River. I got a better map coming up. And they ended up establishing themselves along the Great Lakes region and into the Mississippi River, which we'll talk about in the days to come. And um, here's another example. Their two main settlements that we'll talk about are Quebec and Montreal along the St. Lawrence, and they made their way into what we now call Wisconsin.